Hey, Lance Egan here with Fly Fish Food. If you like fishing for the smartest fish in freshwater like I do, you need to see this fly, the Headstand. This is for carp, mind you, not for trout. So dumb fish need not apply. The Headstand, we're gonna do it in two colors. First up though, the natural version. Check it out.
Dude, that's a big brown.
All right, let's get started tying the Headstand. This is the natural version, I call it. It's not all natural here, as you'll see, but it's a bit more drab in coloration to the other offering that's available. Both my headstand patterns are available through Umpqua, so you can get them from us, of course, in the shop online, or any shop that sells Umpqua flies has access to buy the headstands, and you can get them from them if your local shop carries some Umpqua patterns. With that, let's start tying this fly. So any scud hook would work. This happens to be a Tiemco 2457 in a size 8. It's a very strong hook, heavy wire. You want a heavy wire hook for carp. You don't want to have a light wire hook. I'm just going to start the thread. This is Semperfli 8/0. You could get away with 6/0 as well. Just needs to be strong enough to do this next step, which is tie in these eyes. These are just bead chain eyes. They're just basically bead chain. This is the medium size in silver from Hairline bead chain that I then take the flush cutters and cut off 2 of the eyes. We're basically just trying to make a little bit of weight on the fly. We don't want a lot of weight. We want a carp fly in most situations to sink, but we don't want it to hit the water hard. We don't want it to sink too fast. So the bead chain usually ends up being just the right amount of weight combined with the weight of the hook. Next, we're going to take a little bit of brushable super glue and put a bit of it right on our thread wraps just to try and lock in those eyes a little bit more. Just figure eighting around those eyes, hold them in place. Then we're just going to move the thread down the shank, and I like to actually reposition my hook in the vise since I'm going to do some tying down the bend here a little bit. I'm going to put it in at a funny angle like that. It allows me easier access to tie down the bend without having to miss the point of the hook a little bit more. Next, we're going to add our tail, which is just rabbit strips from Hairline. This one is called Sand variant, the gold variant, or natural, or grizzly, or any of those. Any color that you like would work. I'm going to take just a bit of the zonker strip here, pull some of it away from the skin, try and even up the tips a little. I'm not going to be terribly concerned with it, but get enough of a bunch collected together, trim it away like that. Then I'm just going to take my fingers, hold the tips, and try and get rid of a little bit of the underfur bulk, just pulling out some of that stuff there. I'll get rid of that. Then what we're going to do is tie this in as our tail. So this little bunch of rabbit fur, we're going to just capture with the thread right here. It looks about right, maybe 3/4 the length of the shank. I don't need a really long tail, just a little tail to give us a little bit of motion. I'm going to wrap the butts all the way down the hook just to make it so I don't have a big tie-in bump here at the back end. Then we're going to take a hackle. Any brown hackle would do. This is just a generic cape. If you have an older cape around, if you have a saddle around, you need it just to be a bit on the smaller side of things. Furnace, brown, anything like that, dyed brown even is fine. Even a Whiting 100 pack. There's some packs from Metz that work great. Any sort of brown hackle that's appropriately sized, which in this case is a little undersized. I've got a size 8 hook. I'm going to use a hackle that's probably more like a 12-ish size. I'm going to take the tip of it and stroke the fibers back a bit, get it to about where the length that I want it. I'm going to trim it, leave myself a little notch to tie in and capture with the thread. And we'll tie it right up against our tail. Next up, we're going to add the body. This is just super fine dubbing from Wapsi. This particular color is March Brown. You could, of course, vary this greatly. It's just kind of a rusty brown color. Anything that's rusty brown, olive brown, just think crayfish, think small nymph. This is not a specific imitation of any one thing. It's just kind of a generic imitation that looks more of an attractor style fly, not terribly imitative, just something that could pass as a lot of different things that a carp might eat. All right, I've added some dubbing. I'm going to try and stroke some of those hackle fibers back. and make ourselves a relatively thin body, moving our way towards the eyes like so. Then I'm going to reposition my hook back to the original, and I'm going to wrap this hackle through here, just palmering it, wrapping from the tip to the butt all the way up to the eyes. You could counter wrap that if you want. Carp don't have teeth, so they're not usually very hard on your flies, but if you find that your hackle keeps breaking, you can always counter wrap them with mono or with thread. That's it. We've wrapped our brown hackle up. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, doesn't have to be a high-grade hackle, anything. As long as it's not oversized too much, anything will work pretty well. All right, next up we're going to add our wing, which kind of works as a bit of a hook guard, and for that we're going to use Peacock Sword. So it's a little different than Peacock Hurl. You might notice it's short, it's got a lot of color to it. Comes in a package like this called Peacock Swords. You can get it from Hairline, you can get it from Wapsi, just about everybody makes it. I'm just going to take a segment of it here, maybe cut out, I don't know, 8 or 10 strands of it. Whatever looks good to you, away from the feather. I've got my fingers trapped like so. I'm going to invert the vise. Got one short one here I'm going to get rid of. There we go. Then we're just going to make a little bit of a darker back to our nymph. Just pinch wrap it in place right on top of the hook like that. If you get some hackle stragglers, you can trim them away. I'm going to try and carefully trim away the butts of the Peacock Hurl, or the Peacock Sword, excuse me, it's not Hurl. Then I'm going to wrap a few more times to just kind of lock that Peacock Sword in place. Ooh, I caught the edge of my eyes. Luckily my thread didn't break. The edges of these eyes are a little bit sharp, so you got to be careful. Then we've got our Peacock Sword wing tied in. It works kind of as a hook guard, keeps some algae and moss and things off the hook a little bit, also adds a bit of color. All right, next up we're going to add some legs. These are Wapsi, I've got my vise in the way, Wapsi Silly Legs. Silly Legs bar, this color is pumpkin green orange. There again, you could mix and match to your heart's delight. Pretty easy to match an olive one to an olive or rust to rust, whatever you want to do. They come like that. They look like this out of the package. And then I just grab a single strand like so, and I like to tie them in with this inverted. I'm going to tie it on my side first and just capture it with the thread right behind the eye like that. So it's kind of tied in so it's going to stand away from the hook a bit. Then I'm going to pull this over the top and wrap it in on the opposite side. And the more I pull, the more tension I put on that thread, the more it will stand away, and the less tension I put on it, the more it will lay back. I want it to stand out because I want these kind of like to be outriggers for the fly, so they look like this. That way they'll swim a little more, and then when the fly lands on the bottom, it'll actually land upside down. I don't know if you'll be able to see this in my hand, but it'll land and ride kind of like this. Let's see if I can get my hand in there like that. So the legs sticking out to either side kind of work as a balance. Okay, we've got the legs in place. The next step, the last step, is probably the hardest of this fly. It's not really that difficult, but it's a maddening one, especially when I'm watching it on macro, because it doesn't ever look as neat in the macro lens as I like it to look. But we're just going to add a bit of bright dubbing. This is Hairline dubbing in fluorescent orange. You could use any sort of Antron dubbing. Even an ice dubbing can work here. On this particular fly, I don't favor a lot of flash. On the Chartreuse version, I basically go all flash. This one, not so much, so I'm using just a rabbit dubbing. But all we're going to do is put a bunch of dubbing, make a relatively thin dubbing noodle, or at least attempt it, that's pretty long. And then I'm just going to figure eight and wrap at funny angles around these eyes until we get enough dubbing on there to kind of cover the eyes. So I'm going to put that amount of dubbing on first and see where we get, and then I can always add more if we need. So we're just going to figure eight it a couple of times. Then I'm going to tighten up my dubbing again, maybe wrap a time or two behind the eyes. And then it looks like I need to go between the eyes again, so let's tighten it up. We'll go over the top. Go over the top this direction. And then it looks like I still need a bit more dubbing. to cover as much as I want it to anyway. So we're going to keep adding bits of dubbing, keep extending that dubbing noodle. You can even wrap around the eyes if you want to get crafty. All we're going to do is just basically make an orange head like so, covering the whole fly. Looks tolerable. Then excuse me. Then I'm going to try and force all those fibers back that are loose and just try and make a little bit of a cleaner head. And then we'll finish it off with the handy Umpqua midge whip finish. And then we have the headstand. We call this one the natural headstand only because it uses more natural color compared to the Chartreuse version. Again, could be a small crayfish, could be a little nymph, who knows what it is. It's got some color combos in there that I think work really well. It's been one of my top producers for carp, and carp, as anybody that knows that's fished for them, are pretty wary and spooky, so it's got just the right amount of weight. Anyway, give it a try the next time you're out chasing carp on the flats, the headstand.